By the end of the night, which is really the beginning of the next morning, I am wasted. My bar tab is triple digits. And I'm like, I can't go back to the hotel room like this, even if she's sleeping, right? I'm going to make a fool out of myself. The room is spinning. Yeah, it's just, and so I say, oh, I know the only thing that can really sober you up is time. So I pay my tab. I walk down across the street to South Beach, and I'm like, I'm just going to sit on the beach until I'm sober up. And I get down there, and I don't know if anyone's ever been down to South Beach, Miami at 1 in the morning, but there's a
Oh
lot
yeah,
more
I
people
know.
there than you think.
Yes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Heal with Beth Jones. That's me, your host. My mission is to bring the power of healing to trauma and abuse survivors. That's why every guest on this show will bring you an amazing story of healing in action. So come on, everyone, let's heal.
Welcome to Let's Heal with Beth Jones. I'm Beth, your healing mentor, and today I'm bringing you a conversation that will challenge everything you think you know about faith and addiction. My guest is John Cidle, author of the newly released book Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic. John's story is different from what we typically hear in recovery circles. He didn't find God after hitting rock bottom. He knew Jesus all along. John is the Christian who became an alcoholic, and that's exactly what makes his message so powerful and so needed. In this episode, John opens up about his rock bottom moment on a Miami beach, the childhood trauma that fueled his escape into alcohol, and his radical healing journey that goes far beyond sobriety. We talk about the soul mechanic, the power of radical vulnerability, and why shooting for Jesus gives you sobriety thrown in. If you've ever struggled with addiction, if you've ever wondered how Christians fall into destructive patterns, or if you're ready to understand that healing requires more than just stopping a behavior, this conversation is for you. So let's get to it. Here is John Cidle. John Cidle, welcome to today's episode of Let's Heal with Beth Jones. How are you today, John?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's my absolute delight, and I am excited for this conversation as well. It's going to be fun. Would you take just a moment? Let me just pause before you introduce yourself. And I just have to comment about the yellow here, right? Because look at your glasses.
Yes.
They're on point for my brand colors, which is amazing today. So thank you for doing that. And that was not staged, it was not planned.
No, I have five different pairs, five different colors. I just decided to choose yellow today.
Chose yellow, which is amazing. Maybe a little godly intervention there to put us together. Yeah, on the
Little
same
God
page.
wink.
Yeah, there we go. Would you please take a few moments to introduce yourself to the audience and tell them whatever it is that you would like to tell them about yourself?
Yeah, so I am a dad, a husband. I have two kids. I've been married to my wife for going on 17 years. I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, went to the big city, New York City, for college, and then have lived in the Dallas Fort Worth area for the last, I think it's now like 13 years or so. So been here a while. That's where we met at an event. And I am someone, I like to say, who I am the Christian who became an alcoholic, not the other way around. A lot of times it's the other way around. And the church and Christians have a compartment for that. They have a box where that fits in nicely. Alcoholics who become Christians, addicts who become Christians. But what we struggle with, and I say we because I struggled with this, is people
Mhm.
who love Jesus, know Jesus, follow Jesus, and yet still succumb to nagging spiritual issues, nagging sins. And that was me. And by the time I finally was able to admit it, I was a full-blown alcoholic and hit rock bottom in on a beach in Miami at 1 in the morning in a very dramatic way, and then spent the next year especially, but it's really been the last 2.5 years, crawling back to Jesus and letting him heal all the parts of myself. So that's the quick synopsis. I had my start was in the news business. I've been a writer pretty much my whole life. Worked for some nonprofits and have two books out. And one of them is called Finding Rest, which is on faith and mental health. And the other one is this story, my story of falling into alcoholism and crawling back to Jesus, called Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic, which just came out in October.
Yes, and congratulations on publishing your new book. That is where I learned about you. You were at an organization here in Dallas called Men of Nehemiah, which is, I think, maybe the most phenomenal addiction recovery program that I have ever seen and had the honor of being a part of. Spending time with those men and witnessing their healing journeys and their recovery is amazing. But Men of Nehemiah is phenomenal. And they bring speakers in every week, just about every week on a Tuesday night, what they call All City Worship. Speakers are there to share their stories and their testimonies, all meant to inspire. And that's where I met you a few weeks ago. You were there giving your testimony to those men, inspiring them, but also talking about your book.
Yeah, I have a really good friend who has gone through that program and we've connected, and I've known about Men in Nehemiah for years. They especially are connected really well with my brother-in-law's church. He pastors a church in Flower Mound, Texas.
Hmm.
And they go every year and they sing and they do their thing because they go around to these churches and talk about the restoration power of Jesus. And so I'd known them, and then I met my friend Travis, and
Hmm.
who had gone through the program, inpatient, 9 months, and have gotten even more connected with them. And yeah, it's incredible. They pack about 150 people into this small room and sing at the top of their lungs,
So amazing.
um, worship Jesus, and it's such an experience. It's incredible.
Yeah, I do share those videos of them singing from time to time on social media. So for anyone who's watching this, if you're interested to go see the power of what true godly worship looks like in
Yeah,
singing form, go and watch those videos because they will blow you away. They're amazing.
yeah.
And in fact, Travis is going to be recording on my show on Thursday. So that's exciting. So everyone will get to hear his story as well about going through the program. And I actually know that program through my fiance, who also went through. So he's the one who introduced me to Men of Nehemiah. I haven't recorded with Eddie yet. Our relationship took a turn when we decided we were going to put our lives together. So I'll record with him at some point in time, but we'll try to figure out what the topic of that episode will be. But we will do it at some point in the future.
Yeah.
Let's start with giving people, you've talked about being a Christian and then becoming an alcoholic. And I think the first thing I would want to talk about is your view on what I think is the reality that that duality lives in many people. You meet many people who grow up in a faith-based organization, Christian, some other faith, but in a
Yeah.
religious way, and then life takes hold and we cope. We do what we do to try to cope, escape, survive the things that we experience in our lives. I feel like that path that you've experienced is a very common path, but perhaps one that's not talked about
Yeah.
very much or talked about in the way that you're talking about it from your own experience. I think you're right. We do tend to see God is the savior of people who have been in addiction or who are addicts, but really God's always been there. And for many of us, it's just having stepped away from knowing God's grace and protection and love for some period of time in our life. So let's talk for just a moment about what it is that put you on that path of getting into the coping or survival, the escape mode of alcohol.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that word escape, right? Because I think in my ultimate addiction wasn't to alcohol. My ultimate addiction was to escapism.
Yeah.
And really, what happened is I fell into a pattern of escapism from a very young age. 6, was molested by my sister. Fast forward, was abused by my stepdad physically. And when you're that young, psychologically, you can't make meaning of that in your brain. And so very young, I just wanted to escape. Bad things happen to me in general. My pull is to flight, right? I just want to get away.
Yeah.
There's freeze in there too, right? Wanting to just not have to deal with what's going on. So, in a sense, you could say my alcoholism started very young at 6. Now, I didn't have my first drink. I don't remember really I didn't get drunk until my early preteen years. But even then, it wasn't, I got drunk once and then it was just this spiral downward. I really didn't start seeing alcohol as a viable means to escape until I turned 21 because I had anxiety and OCD. And so I was always really scared of alcohol and what it meant. I think I had heard one time that like when you drink, it kills brain cells. And so I literally was like, oh my gosh, if I drink, I'm going to turn stupid. And because some of my OCD manifests in medical OCD, as you can tell. Once I turned 21 and started and had a pass, if you will, to drink more, I started realizing, oh, this is a really easy, quick way to escape. Like when I don't want to feel things, when I don't want to deal with stuff, when I don't want to deal with anxieties, when I don't want to have to face the realities of what's going on, man, this is a really cheap, easy way to escape. And the truth is, that is the truth, right? And I think in AA circles, they say alcohol wasn't my problem. Alcohol is the solution to my problems. That's true.
Yes, it is true.
And so I found out as I turned 21 that alcohol was a very viable, easy, quick way to deal with the emotions and the things that I didn't want to deal with. And so starting then, I would say I really, that really started the way that I would tend to cope in stressful, hard times. And so I say my relationship with alcohol was really up and down for most of my life because as I would go through hard periods and emotions, I would drink more and then I'd cut back or then I'd stop for a week or whatnot. And then I bought into the lie because I can stop, I don't have a problem, right? But this is what I talk about in the book is that really anything that is misordered is disordered. So whether that's alcohol, whether that's food, whether that's your phone, whether that's work, whether that's your spouse, whether that's sex, whether that's whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not just about quantity. Quantity is a way to if you have an issue, right? But think about the person who binges on food is just as much as addicted to the food as the person who doesn't eat any food, right?
Yes.
Food is in a sense, the idol, the thing that is occupying a misordered place in their life. So I think we can see that with food, but we don't see that with substances. And I get it, right? If you're not having any heroin or you're having a lot of heroin, yes, I get it. But my point is with alcohol, it wasn't just about, was I getting drunk every night? It wasn't just about, am I going on binge drinking periods? It always occupied the place in my life as my coping mechanism.
Yes.
And it's interesting because in 2021, I wrote a book on faith and mental health about what it looked like to be a person of faith that struggled with clinical anxiety, clinical OCD, and depression. And I wrote that after a very hard time in my life. And I think I got to the point where I was looking back, I would say a pretty good place. Looking back, I can see the misordered stuff still being there. But at the time, I thought I'm in a good place. I even wrote in that book, I have to watch how much I'm drinking so that it's not a crutch. But
It's just like your admission, right?
Yeah.
It was like an admission.
Right.
Yeah.
But then that book comes out in September of 2021. And lo and behold, I hit an even harder time in my life. And so what I had done, what I had written, what I had been prepared for was all fine and dandy up until I got to even a harder time than I ever thought. And that included the biggest bout of depression I'd ever gone through. I thought I'd gone through big depression, and then the mother of all depressions hit, right?
Yeah.
Partly around, I was working for myself. I had my own company. I lost my biggest client unexpectedly 2 weeks before Christmas. and was like, what am I going to do? I had expectations and thoughts of what my book would do. My book did really well. Top 100 book on all of Amazon, right?
Mm.
And yet I was like, I started looking at the glass half empty and saying, oh, yeah, I made this bestseller list, but I didn't make this one. I did this interview, but I didn't do this one. And the devil started using that to whisper lies, lies that went all the way back to what had happened to me when I was 6, when I was 12, things that spoke to core wounds. You are not wanted. No one cares. Just all those things. And I started listening to them, especially as I was weakened, if you will, by that depression. And then you fast forward to the spring, and my son, who was 4 at the time, was diagnosed with a tumor in
Mhm.
his shin. And even though that ended up being benign, that whole process,
Oh, yeah.
man, was just tough.
Yeah.
And so what I found was, once again, it's really easy to use alcohol to treat those unwanted feelings. It just is. And so, in the hardest moment of my life, instead of using that as an opportunity to press into my faith, instead of giving that over to Jesus, which is hard, it's
Yeah.
hard to go to therapy. It's hard to sit in a group. It's hard to sit in a circle.
Yeah.
It's hard to preach the gospel to yourself, right? When it feels like you can't touch it. I can touch a glass of bourbon. I can instantly feel the
Yeah.
relief that 3 glasses gives me, especially if I'm drinking it within an hour, right?
Mm.
And I just slowly started turning more and more to it, drinking more and more. 1 glass led to 3, led to 5, led to who knows how many. Drinking at 8 led to drinking at 5, led to drinking at 3, especially now that you don't have as much work to do. I mean, I have my own company. I'm working for myself. I'm in
Yeah.
my home office. It's easy. And even though I say I had this recurring escapism with alcohol throughout my entire life, really from 2021 to 2023 is when I what I call my severe slide period, where it really just started a foothold in every aspect of my life. I started pulling back. I started lying and hiding, and it was drunk every night. It was pre-gaming before my daughter's Christmas program and showing up drunk. It was all those things, right? And it came to a head in 2023, May 2023. My wife and I were on an anniversary trip, and this is what I alluded to earlier.
Mm.
My wife and I were on an anniversary trip, and there was one night we were down in Miami, South Beach, got in a hotel right on the beach. And there was one night, a couple nights in, my wife said, "Hey, I just want to have a night in." She's a bookworm. She's recharged by being alone. I'm recharged by being with people. And she said, "Go ahead, do whatever you want. If you want to walk the boardwalk, whatever." And I'm like, in the end, I'm not a party drinker. I'm not a let's go get crazy till
Mhm.
4 a.m. I am, again, because it's my escape, and what I'm trying to escape from is my thoughts and what's going on. I'm a stay-at-home drinker. You give me a bottle of bourbon in a
Yeah.
hotel room, and I'd be like, this is the life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I said, you know what? I'm not gonna go out by myself. That's not me. I said, I'm just gonna go down to the hotel bar, have a couple appetizers, have a couple drinks, and I'll see you back up in the room. I think there was like sports on. It was like NBA playoffs and NHL hockey playoffs. And she looks at me because by this time, even though I'm quote unquote hiding it, I'm not hiding it as well as I think I am,
No.
which we never do and we never are.
No.
And she looks at me and she says, "Okay, but promise me you won't get drunk." And Beth, I can say with everything in me, when I responded, "I will not get drunk," I planned on not getting drunk.
Of course.
I would have passed a lie detector.
Yeah, of course.
And yet, I go down to the hotel bar. I have my first gin martini, and I can't tell you how many I had after that. By the end of the night, which is really the beginning of the next morning, I am wasted. My bar tab is triple digits, and I'm like, I can't go back to the hotel room like this, even if she's sleeping, right? I'm going to make a fool out of myself. The room is spinning. Yeah, it's just, and so I say, oh, I know the only thing that can really sober you up is time. So I pay my tab. I walk down across the street to South Beach, and I'm like, I'm just going to sit on the beach until I'm sober up. And I get down there, and I don't know if anyone's ever been down to South Beach, Miami at 1 in the morning, but there's a
Oh
lot
yeah,
more
I
people
know.
there than you think,
Yes,
right?
there are a lot of people there. Yeah,
And
it's
and
hot.
I'm sitting there and I'm like, all of a sudden I have to go to the bathroom and I'm like, I can't make it back to the hotel. I
Mm,
can't just drop my drawers and be on the beach here. So I look and I'm like, you know what? The world's biggest toilet is in front of me. And so with all my clothes on, I wade into the ocean. I like turn around, I'm like facing the boardwalk. I start going to the bathroom and it starts coming out of both ends. And I just have this moment of realization of what has your life become?
mm,
You are literally sitting here alone after promising not to get drunk, after setting out not to get drunk, waiting in your own feces. This is what it's come to. This is what happened. And the next day, you'd think, oh, that's the turning point. But it still had to get a little lower, which is my wife asked me about it. She said, did you get drunk? And I call it my Peter moment because 3 times throughout the day, she asked me and I denied getting drunk. And finally at dinner, like my heart and my soul is just wrecked. Like the Holy Spirit is working on me. And
because of course she knows what the answer
oh,
is.
she knows. Of course she does. Of course she does.
Yes.
And so I finally at dinner, I was like, hey, babe, I need to tell you something. I did get drunk last night.
Mm,
She says, I know you did. But she breaks down because I just can't believe that you lied to me so
mm,
quickly and so easily. She said, do you know what that does to a woman? What else? What else can I ask you about that you're going to so quickly and confidently and easily lie about? How can
yeah.
I trust you? And we pay the bill. We end up walking down to the beach, kind of to the same area. And I'm making the promises. I'm like, okay, I'll never drink again. I know I need help. I just can't stop, all the stuff. And we get down there and she looks at me at one point and she says, John, it's not that I never want you to drink again. I don't care if you never drink again. That's not the point. I need you to get to the root of why you're drinking, why you need to escape, why you can't sit with your feelings, why anything uncomfortable is just becomes so unbearable. And I'm thinking, because she's otherwise it'll just be something else, right? Sure, maybe you never drink again, but you're just going to replace it with something else. And so I'm thinking in my head, like, can we just go back to the not drinking part? That would be easier. I don't want to get to the root of the issue. I want to do the heart work.
Yeah.
But yet I'm like, okay, all right, you're right. And so we have been, going to see a Christian therapist for some of the traumas that had happened to me because listen, you've never dealt with those things, right?
Hmm.
You've never fully even like, you've talked to me about them, but you've never really talked to me about them. There are things that you need to work through there. And so on the beach that night, I filled out the interest form. I emailed the Christian therapist, and that started when we got back to Dallas. I think we left the next day or the day after. That started an intense year of getting to the root of what was going on, of getting to the root of why I drank. And I think for the first time, I'd written this article, How Did I Stop Drinking? Because I had tried over the years, right?
Yeah.
Like you start to realize this is probably not healthy. I written this article that said, How was I able to stop drinking? And it was, I finally stopped trying to stop drinking. And what I realized in that year was the necessity in my life that if I wanted more than just sobriety, and if I wanted sobriety to last, I had to shoot for something greater than sobriety. And because, like my wife said, if it was just about sobriety, if it was just about not drinking, it would just be something else. And so I shot for Jesus in that
Yeah.
year of really letting him into all of the parts of myself, the parts that were wounded, the part that I had walled off, the parts that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
And when I did that, then I got sobriety thrown in. And now it's stuck for 2.5 years. And there's C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite authors, wrote in his book, Mere Christianity, shoot for heaven and get the earth thrown in. But shoot for earth, you may get it, you may not. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not saying there
Yeah.
aren't people who have shot for sobriety and haven't got it. They have. What I'm saying
Sure.
is if you want the most flourishing, fulfilled life now and in eternity, which is what I'm ultimately concerned with, then you have to shoot for something more than just sobriety.
Yes.
And I asked people this, and I asked this at the Men and Nehemiah event. I said, how many miserable sober person? And a lot of people raised their hand.
I do. Yeah. Me
Right.
included. Yeah.
And what the
Yeah.
world offers those people is a round of applause. right? Because they've
Yeah.
done it. They've got
Yes.
sobriety.
Yes. Yes.
But what I want people is I don't want you to be miserable. I want you
Yeah.
flourishing. Now, there's a difference between miserable and life being easy. What I tell people is now I have the best life possible, not the easiest. Actually,
Yeah.
life is
Me
probably
too.
a little easier if I'm drinking because I don't have to face it.
Because you're escaping it. You're just leaving.
So there's a difference. And miserable are right.
Yeah.
And but yet what I've gotten now is the best life possible, the most flourishing, fulfilled life. Now, I'm not like that doesn't mean I'm on the mountaintop every single day. It doesn't mean there's not more that I can be doing and more of Jesus that I'm aiming for. There is, right?
Yes.
But for me, it's become about more than just sobriety. And I think for so many people, we stop there. And the
Yeah.
message of secular based recovery is that's it. That's it. Just shoot for get sobriety and everything will be taken care of. Some things will be taken care of for sure, but I want more. And so that's the story that I tell now. And that's the message that I carry to
Yeah.
others, to use terms, is I want more for you. Shoot for Jesus and get sobriety thrown in. And I think you'll
I
find a
love that. I
flourishing,
love
fulfilled
that.
life.
I love that. So I just wonder, and I can't help but think, and I suppose that you will agree with what I'm going to say here, but it strikes me that you wrote your first book and God was like, that's great. The world needs this. Thank you very much. But your purpose is bigger than this. Your
Yeah.
message is more powerful than this, one that people really need to hear. And so what happens when we are in that place is we have to go on that journey to go down to figure out what the real story is, right? And then to be able to share that. So it just strikes me that God put you on that path to take you down even further to share the story that you have now, which I think is beautiful. And it's hard to say that sometimes about the hard stuff we go through, but it is beautiful when we're on the other side and can look back and understand why we were in those places that we were in.
Yeah. I say I didn't realize, but with my first book, I was writing part one.
Yeah.
I thought that was the whole thing. I didn't realize it was part one.
Yeah.
And then with
Yeah.
this book, I wrote part two. And I think there's probably even a part three because what I say too is
Yeah.
I thought I went through what I thought was the hardest part of my life and I wrote a book about that. Then I went through an even harder part of my life. I
Mm.
wrote a book about that and that's this book. But guess what? Again, it's been really hard since then.
Yeah.
And I don't, and
Yeah.
some people are like, wow, John, don't make sobriety and whatever so appealing. I'm just going to be real with you, right? You're taking away my coping mechanism. We just
Yeah,
talked,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Like,
Yeah, no, I totally get that. But I think the difference where you are and where I am is that you go through a healing process to go in and
yes.
understand what the root cause is, and you really dig in to understand and see yourself as a survivor, which is the same path that I've been on. And thank you, by the way, for sharing all of your story there. And it was very quick stop at a long life that you've had, a lot of experiences that you've had. But thank you so much for sharing all of that. I am in this place that I'm in today for the same reason, right? I'm the healing mentor, and I literally had to spend 50 years in trauma and abuse and unprocessed emotions so that I could then have my rock bottom moment, different from yours, but I have my rock bottom moment, and then also spend an intense period, about a year, doing the same type of really deep self discovery work to understand who I am and understand myself as a survivor. And that has led me to a place where God said, now that you understand all that and you understand how to heal, it's now your job to share that with the world. And that's one of the reasons why this podcast exists, because that's one of the ways that I do that is to bring people on this show and let them tell their stories and talk about my own stories that you too can heal. That's my message to everyone out there, right?
Mhm.
Or God's message through me is to let people know that you too can heal. So I've had that same experience. I first put my story out publicly in a chapter in a collaborative book about 2 years before I published my own book, and I call it my Cliff's Note version. Right? So I'm just like putting my foot in the water, right? So for you, part one would be my Cliff Note version, and then I've written the much fuller story. But I think the reason why we have more in us is, first of all, God's put us here to be those kind of people that share our stories for the good of helping others. And I think those of us who do that mean, we all continue to have our story, but we especially continue to have our story that we can really see in the moment and understand what's developing because we're going to tell that story in the future, right? And I'm living that myself right now. I know that I will write another book, probably will start it sometime next year. I know what the topic of that book is already, and I'm living it right now. So the
Mm,
experiences that I will share and what I'm learning from those experiences, I can see God's hand in the path. So mine is about healing different types of relationships and how that
mm,
works. And I've had a path where I've healed the relationship with the first person who abused me, who was my grandfather. And
mm.
he died 25 years before I began my healing journey. And so everything there has been healed spiritually or karmically at the soul level. Very much God's hand in all of that healing process. And now I'm working on some people in my life who are very much alive, but very challenging in walking through the healing process in those relationships. So I'm actually living it now. And I think we have those experiences. And it sounds like you're in one of those now yourself where you know there's more story to come in the future as you continue to live our lives. I think it's also the reality of the healing journey, right? And one of the reasons why it's so important to really heal and to do the work that you've done and the work that I've done, again, to dig into that root cause and to understand what causes us to go to the place of escape, whatever our form of escape is, and to survive, what causes that. We really need to understand that because we understand what happened to us, how that shaped us, what it is about us that causes us to gravitate toward those particular escape mechanisms that we use. So mine was just about every form of dissociation that you can think about, memory.
Mm.
And I've like so much of my life is not recorded because that's how I dealt with trauma, was just to basically leave the scene of the crime and not record it in my
Yeah.
mind. When I don't, by God's grace, I don't have the gene for alcohol or drug addiction in me, only God's grace, because I've played around there and arguably probably tried to figure out whether or not I did have that gene. But again, by
Mm.
God's grace, that's not something that I've had to deal with. But other forms of escaping and creating a super, super busy life, chaotic and busy life, where that's what I
Right.
was doing was just living this very chaotic life. To your point about different ways of escaping, we all have them, right? And it's just what we do with them. But the healing process allows us to understand all of that. So when we face life in the future, part of being a human, our human experience that we're going to continue to face, we now know what we need to do in order to be able to get through those hard times, how to heal in those hard times, which is exactly what you're describing in your walk with God, your walk with Jesus, is how you go about doing that, which is beautiful. So kudos to you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes.
I
And thank you for
appreciate
sharing
that.
all that. Yeah, I appreciate that a lot, you sharing it, because it's important for people to hear that and hear the different experiences that we have. But ultimately, we're all getting to the same place when we're on a healing journey. And that's the freedom that we feel from the things that constrain us. And really, it's about releasing emotions from our heart that don't allow us to show up in loving relationships with people. And that's really, I think, what healing is about.
Yeah, and I think one of the messages that I try to make as clear as possible is that when it comes to healing, I have this analogy that I use in the book. It's if you had a Model T in your garage, the first car ever built, or maybe
Mm,
that was a Model A, whatever it was, Model A, Model T, and you had access, like something in that Model A breaks down, right? And next door is lives Henry Ford, the
mm,
man who literally designed and built and put that thing together. Like he knows every nook and cranny and bolt and inch of that thing. Would you not want to take that Model A to your neighbor Henry Ford when something is wrong with it? You
yes,
would.
of course.
And so, for what I think we need to grasp and understand is that we have access to the creator of our soul bodies, like
Yeah, we
the
do.
person who knows every nook and cranny. So if
Yeah.
you are broken and you want to heal, ultimately, don't you want to take your soul to the soul mechanic? like the
I love that.
one
The soul
who knit
mechanic.
it together,
I
right?
love that.
And
Yes.
so even me, like I obviously I do therapy, I did EMDR, I did it with a Christian therapist. Like I'm all for those things, right?
Mm,
But what I want then people to understand is the goal of those is to invite Jesus into healing, right?
yes.
Because
Yeah.
he is the ultimate healer, right?
Yeah.
He's the only one that can fully give you restoration, like water for your soul, right?
Mm.
And so that's why when the title of the podcast, Let's Heal, I'm like, yes, let's. And guess what? I know the great healer. And
Yes,
and
as do I.
and use
Yeah.
tools, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I know you do. Let's use the tools and the common graces that he's given
That
us
God created, all of
to
it.
help heal. Yeah.
Tell people find the ones that work for you and put them together. But I do think what you're saying is, I think that the key message of what you're saying is really important. And I believe this too, is that ultimately spirituality is what we have to connect into. And you're a Christian, you walk with Jesus. I'm also a Christian. I also know that there are a lot of other religions out there. I grew up being exposed to many religions around the world. And what I know from all of the people who I've met and talked to throughout my entire life is that spirituality and that belief in a creator, a power much stronger than us, God, that's the core that really knits the healing process together, right? And so I think however you take spirituality on, whatever you believe in terms of the creator and whatever your religious alignment is, it's about a belief in something greater than ourselves, right? And a higher
Yeah.
power and a creator, and that none of this is random. To me, it's not random, it's orchestrated. Each one of our lives are orchestrated. And I do believe, I agree with you that spirituality is a huge part of the healing process. And it's one of the things that I talk about as one of the principal tenets in healing. And in fact, I talk about the healing journey. The word heal for me is an acronym to mean to hope, evolve, and
Mm,
love. And when I talk about evolution and the evolved part, I'm talking about using healing tools to do that deep self-discovery work that I talked about earlier, right? Really digging down to understand what happened to me and how have I been living as a result of what happened to me, right? And through the process of evolving, getting to know ourselves as the survivor, someone who's overcome what we've been through, the suffering and pain in our life, we then can see other people who've hurt us in our life in that same way. And that eventually gives way to exploring love and figuring out what is love in your life. It starts with self-love, but a huge piece of that is recognizing that from even before we were created and conceived, we had unconditional love from God. And that's a huge part of the healing process is recognizing that love. And that's why your life's not random. It is by design, even the hard parts of our life that we go
mm.
through.
Yeah, as a Christian, right? I was reading this morning in the scriptures. Like I think sometimes as Christians we think or we grasp onto this message that when we start following Christ, like life gets easy, right?
Yeah.
The easy part is not that things stop happening, it's that you now have again access to the soul mechanic, right?
Yeah, I love that. Soul
And,
mechanic. I'm going to use that, by the
and you
way.
now
The
know where
soul
to
mechanic.
turn. And the thing is like I think people there's the language of a higher power. And I think one of the things that I love to tell people is you and I, Beth, just happen to know who that actual higher power is.
Yes.
I know, like
Yes.
we have act that, right? And
Yeah.
that's what I want people. I don't want them to stop. Use that to get you in the door, right? But it's man, now let
Yeah.
me introduce you. It's not the light socket.
Yeah. Let's talk about, I want to share something that I've not talked about on this show before. I'm going to tell you about, because the really cool nature of putting these like dots in my life that have come together has only happened in the last probably few weeks. But I think it's important in what we're talking about here because when we talk about anything that causes us to be separate from relationships, right, and that's anything that is in that addiction world, and we've touched on a lot of different things that are in that space, the escape mechanisms, we're cutting the relationship with God, right? God is in that group of relationships that we're pulling ourselves back from and escaping, leaving when we use those types of coping mechanisms, right? And when I when I was doing my intention setting for this year, so I'm not a big goal setter because I find them to be very prescriptive and then I don't follow the goal from day three and I'm frustrated. So I look broad picture at what are the things I want to work on in the year. And those are my intentions that I'm working on. One of my intentions for 2025 was to strengthen my direct connection with God, right? And what I mean by that is I get spiritual messaging from all sorts of ways, including the Bible, people who are intuitives that work with me and can help me to say, spiritually, these things are happening in your life, or this is the messaging that I'm getting, right? So I have a lot of different ways that I um, bring the messages to me. And one of the things I really wanted to do was to strengthen my direct connection. So in my meditation and prayer with God, that I'm hearing directly, right? And
Mm,
so I'm receiving what it is that God's will is for my life directly in my communication. So that's my intention coming in. I want direct communication with God. And then I meet Eddie around Christmas of last year. And as I mentioned, he is a graduate of Mena Nehemiah, so he's also an addict. And so when we started dating, I recognized pretty quickly that he was probably, and he has turned out to be the person who I was looking for. And that's a whole other story about a journey we've been through, the love exploration to find him. But I recognized that he was my person. God has given you this
mm,
person. And I realized quickly that we were probably going to be together for the long term. And so I just stopped drinking. And I was not we drank more than I should on occasion. I probably had some similar experiences to yours in the way that alcohol showed up in my life
yeah.
in the past. And when he came into my life, I wasn't drinking, I would say on the heavier side, but I might have a glass of wine every night or maybe a couple glasses, whatever. Maybe I'd skip a night or two. And then so it was a regular part of living my life. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Right? But when I met him within a couple of weeks, I'm like, I'm just going to stop drinking. I don't need it, right? And I mentioned that before because I don't have the addictive gene, right? So I don't need it. And I want to see what's going to happen here. And what really was in my mind at the time was if this person is going to be in my life for the long haul, why would I make his job of being with me more difficult?
Mm,
Because even though he would say, it's fine, I can handle it. I don't mind if you want to, no big deal. I was like, why would I even have it around you or put you in even for half a second where you have to go, she's doing it, but I'm not going to. Why would I even do that? So I just completely eliminated it. And I would say it was out of solidarity in the beginning, right? What I realized just a few weeks ago, like literally, I'm like, what is this? This is like November now, and I probably recognized this in the middle of October. I was in my meditation and prayer, and God was like, you do realize that taking out alcohol was part of eliminating that barrier to me. And I was like, of course it was. So it's just so cool to me how that all comes together.
mm.
That decision that I made and this person coming into my life was really also about my own desire to have this deeper connection with God, right? And a more direct connection with God, right? That I think we miss that sometimes with our escape mechanisms.
Yeah, I think what I tell people is like there was my addiction, the disease of the addiction is both spiritual and physical,
Yeah,
right? There are
I completely
spiritual
agree.
roots.
And relational, right? It has a huge impact on relationships too.
Well, absolutely. And so I think the physical aspect, of course, like when I got to my rock bottom moment, one of the reasons I drank as much as I did is because I said, I'm not having withdrawal symptoms. I only really had one withdrawal symptom in my head. I was like, I don't have the shakes. And as long as I don't have the shakes, then I don't have withdrawal symptoms. But guess what? I stopped drinking. And there's this thing called the night sweats that you get when you're addicted to a substance and you stop it because you've so jacked up your autonomic nervous system that it doesn't know how to regulate your body temperature at night,
Yeah.
right? So I
Yeah.
had, so my point is, there was a physical draw, like there were cravings, there was like that was there. But ultimately, and I think this is what you're saying in a way, is like when I am turning to a substance, when I'm turning to alcohol, when you, just the general you, are turning to food or your phone or to, you're ultimately saying to
Gambling,
God,
porn. We could go on
"Shut-"
and on with what the list is, right?
you're saying, I
Yeah.
don't trust you, God.
Yeah.
I don't
You're
trust
turning
that you're
away.
enough. Trust that you're going to provide. I don't that what you have is good,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
I need to take control. So that's a trust issue, that's a pride issue, right? So ultimately, like the roots of my addiction are go very deep. And if the Bible is true and when it talks about a broken and fallen world and that sin like fractured the perfect world that God had created, right? Of course, like those issues, the sin and the brokenness in the world are what cause abuse, are what
Yes.
cause trauma, are what cause us to say, I don't trust you. I
Yeah.
think that this substance is going to be a better placeholder, a better idol in my life than you are, right?
Yeah.
And yes, of course, our escapism, are going towards these things, whatever these things are for you, you get in the way of our relationship with God.
Mm.
I talk about, there's a whole chapter in the book called How Does This Happen? And so I go through it's physical, it's spiritual, it's cultural, right? There's mental layers, there's cultural layers, there's physical, there's like all this stuff, right? And I think for me, what I try to be clear about is that like all of those things play together. And they play together to where I abandoned what the Bible calls my first love. And so there's this book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is at the end. A lot of people, there's movies made about it, right? But really, ultimately, the book of Revelation is a letter written to 7 churches in the Middle Eastern world. And it's so interesting that Jesus is talking to this one church, this church in the city of Ephesus, which is modern day Turkey. And it says, you know, he goes on, you guys are nailing it. You guys are killing it. Awesome. You know all the right things. You say all the right things. You're doing a lot of the right things. But he says this. He goes, you know what? You've abandoned your first love, which is me. And if you don't return, I'm going to spit you out. How do you become the Christian alcoholic? You abandon your first love. That's relational,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
You start to say, you know what? This substance is better than you. This substance can give me more than you. This
So powerful,
substance
John.
is the thing
Yeah.
that I want above all else. I
Yes.
abandoned my first love. So I had all the right knowledge. And I did love Jesus, right? And I had let him into certain aspects of my life, but I had said relationally, I don't trust you here. When I hit the hardest part of my life, I said, I don't trust you here. And now I'm going to turn to the substance. But absolutely, it's relational, right? Those things come between us and our.
Yeah. I've done the same thing, by the way. And as where we started this in the beginning, many of us who are Christians and spiritual have taken that path where we don't turn to the first love, the unconditional love, the creator, the one who cared enough about us to create us to be the amazing
Right.
beings who we are. We lose that and
Yeah.
we don't turn there to get ourselves back. That's really what the healing journey is about, is getting back to that place. And spirituality is a huge aspect of that. I completely agree. Yeah, it is. Hi, I'd like to invite you to get your free copy of Empowered Survivors, the Healing Quick Start Guide. The guide includes an assessment to help you determine whether you're ready to do the deep transformational inner work that will set your heart free from any fear-based emotions that you're carrying and lead you to love-based living. Download your copy of the guide at empoweredsurvivors.com/heal. So I wanted to do this because you've mentioned it a couple of times yet. So here is the book, and you can see it behind you over there as well.
There you go. Yep.
Which is a great cover, by the way, and a great title, Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic. And you do tell a very candid story, and you talk openly, which I think is important in sharing our stories, to be vulnerable and very candid about the reality of what we've experienced. So I applaud you for that, and thank you very much for being one of those that shares your story in this way, because it's wonderful. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I think that there's 2 things that I say about that. One is a science-backed argument and one's a biblical-based argument, right? And I love when science catches up to the Bible. But there's this verse,
Also from God, the
yeah,
science,
yeah, right.
right?
James
God created all of
5:16,
it,
right.
including the smart people who figure out the science that God
Yeah.
created.
So I talk about this verse, James 5:16,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so interesting. It says, because I talk about the power of radical vulnerability, right? And vulnerability is
Love that.
it's a popular term. It's come back in vogue, but I say it's got to be radical, right? And what does radical look like? Looks different for everyone, but it's going one step further than you're comfortable going,
Yep.
right? It's really letting people in, right? And what's so fascinating is that James 5:16 says, confess your sins one to another, not so that you can be forgiven, not so that you can find peace, not so that you can find rest, but it says so you can be healed.
Yes.
And it's interesting that the science and the research backs that up. It shows that, and so I quote Brene Brown in the book, who talked about how trauma survivors, when they were actually open about what happened to them,
Mhm.
when they talked about it, confessed that, and
Mhm.
confess doesn't mean like, it's not just I did something wrong to someone, right? It's just, it's talking about what happened. When they talked about it, that literal and physical healing could take place. And so, to your point of telling my story, I was talking to someone in coffee this morning. They're like, were you always radically vulnerable? And I said, no, right? Like, I was always generally more of an open book than I guess the next guy. But look what happened when I wasn't fully open and honest about what I was
For
using to
you,
cope.
your path. Yeah.
Look what happened, right?
Yeah.
So if I was more open and honest earlier, maybe we could bypass some of this crud in my life, right? Now listen, God uses it for my
Yeah.
good.
No, that's not what your path was, not what your story is, right?
But there is literal scientific proof that when we
Yes.
talk about those things,
Yes.
give those a place in community, it helps us.
Yes. And you're a product of that. Your healing journey, I'm a product of that. Witnessing and being witnessed is a huge aspect of us. I'm a big proponent of getting into the right support group for that very reason, so that you can share your story and start to get it out of you. It starts to release the power and the control that our trauma stories have over us, right?
Mhm.
So it's important to get those out. So it's interesting you talking about God's purpose and you down. We already talked about this a little bit, but taking you down another level so you could get to the radical vulnerability of your story, right? God really wants you to be talking about it and being doing. I have for a while this year moving into becoming the healing mentor is about becoming more and more public. So I wrote a book. Now I have this show. I'm putting the show on TV in February. So about to really hit the speaking circuit. So really getting my message out there publicly in a big way. And then one of my other intentions for this year was to get my message out to 1 million people. That's what I'm seeking.
Mm.
Whenever that happens, this year, next year, whenever it's going to happen, it will happen in God's time. One of the things that I wrestled with though is I kept having this idea of the fear of God, like this fear of God. What is my fear of God when I would think about all of this, right? And I realized that the fear of God that I have is not living up to my ability to be radically vulnerable, right? Because that's how I'm created. That is part of my human design, which I've never heard that phrase. The phrase I use, so I use radical with transformation because transformation is also another overused word, right? But literally, if you know my whole story, I literally am radical personal and professional transformation, like completely
Mm.
different person than the one who I was 5.5
Mm.
years ago, right? But that radical vulnerability comes back for me, and I can really relate to that because I've been in that place of, for me, it's the fear that I'm not going to do what God wants me to do with the power of my message, right? And I am radically vulnerable. I don't have any problem with that, but doing it in the right way and in the right places and big enough to be able to serve God's purpose. That's my fear of God that I have.
I think there's a book that I used in my first year of recovery that was really helpful for me. It's called Living Fearless by a guy named Jamie Winship. And it really takes you through how to find your identity and identity given by God, right? And I think for, and he says this in the book that for many of us, we can have an inkling of what our identity is, but that it's just as destructive to not know your identity as it is to live out partial, the
Yeah,
partial aspect of
yeah,
your identity, right? And
yeah,
so the
yeah.
example I give in the book is you have this person, this guy, let's say, who knows that his identity is as a ship captain.
Hmm.
Okay, great. God wants him to be the captain of a mighty battleship, right? That's going out and destroying the enemy, that's going out and striking fear into the hearts of those who would
Hmm.
try to come against his plans, right? But he ends up being the captain of a rusty tugboat that's like puttering out, and he's, look, I'm the captain of a ship. Yeah, you're a captain of a ship, but you're actually not the captain of the ship you're supposed to be. You are called
Mm,
to be a mighty naval battleship captain, and you're out here piddling around in a tugboat, sir. You
yeah.
know? And so I think what so many of us fail to do. You want to know also how you become a Christian alcoholic? You feel like you're out fish out of water. You feel
Yeah.
like you're not fully walking in your purpose, in your calling, and your identity, right? And so when we nail that down, so what you talk about, radical transformation, radical vulnerability, right? We have to embrace these things that the Lord has called us to. And part of my identity statement that this book helped me fashion is I'm a bold, courageous, decisive, vulnerable storyteller.
Yeah.
So through journaling exercises, through prayers, through different aspects in the book, he helps you find your identity statement.
Yes,
And I can tell
absolutely.
you
Yes.
that I now filter everything in my life through that identity statement given to me by God, right?
Yes.
Is I've turned jobs down worth a lot of money. They didn't fit that identity
Yeah,
statement,
I get
right?
you. Yep.
And I would have, and again, you want to know how you start drinking away is like you take a job that just because it pays a lot of money, you're miserable. Talk about going back to the miserable sober person, right?
Yeah.
And so I think part of the work that we need to do is seeing who has the Lord created, that soul mechanic, that soul engineer. What has he created me to do, and how can I operate in that and out of that?
Yes, I agree with you. I think exploration of life purpose is definitely one of the things that comes out of the healing process, and then understanding what our experiences have been and how we're meant to use them. I think a lot of people who go through the things that we've been talking about, and particularly the ones who spend a lot of time in deep alcoholism or drug addiction or some sort of a gambling addiction, those types of things, I think I know there is emotion attached to that that can prevent them from really doing the work that they could be doing, really using their story and the power of their story to help other people. And so I tell those people, I'm like, all that is just making you relatable. That's all that's happening, right? Because you can heal and you can become an addict who's in recovery. You're working in recovery every day. It's not controlling your life. There's power in that story. Now you're relatable to so many people, literally hundreds of thousands of people who need to see you and who need to see you in that place where you're walking your recovery every day. You're staying aligned with God spiritually, and now you have healing power. You have the healing power of God through you. That's all that's happened to you. But so many times our story gets lost in the narrative that the imposter syndrome or the inner critic tells us about what our experiences has been. And we let that narrative in our head be much more powerful than our truth, which is the truth that God has given us about who we truly are, right? And what we're meant to be doing.
It's funny. I know I keep bringing some of this stuff up, but it's my message that I've been given to take. But I struggled with a lot of that as well.
Mm.
Of You talk about imposter syndrome, right? Geez, you're a Christian that became an alcoholic. Talk about feeling like an imposter. And in that year of intense therapy, of really intense healing, one of the things that became really clear and obvious to me is if you look in the Bible, it's really just a collection of messed up, jacked up people.
Yes,
There's only one person that wasn't messed up or jacked up, right?
Jesus,
So other than like take your pick. David
you're
was a
right. Yeah,
rapist. Abraham
yeah,
lied and gave his wife over to Pharaoh and said, "No, she's my sister." Peter, right, was reprimanded publicly by Paul for falling into being all about legalistic. Paul himself talks about in the book of Romans chapter 7, everything I want to do, I don't do, and everything I don't want to do, I do. This is like the
yeah.
greatest Christian ever to live outside of Jesus, right? And he has this whole diatribe of I'm weak and he calls himself I'm the chief of sinners. He says I'm a wretched man. And so I think what we have to realize is so much of what so many people think about Christianity is this buttoned up,
Oh, yeah. Well,
wear my Sunday best. And honestly, if you look at the Bible, it's all about this collection of wobbly, weak-kneed
mhm.
misfits who have a story of just coming to the end of themselves, right? And I can't do it on my own, Jesus,
Yes,
right?
turning to Jesus, going back to the Father.
And
Yep, for
so I
healing. Yeah,
think
exactly.
for so many of us, don't be ashamed. You can have grief for the things you've done. I have godly
Of
grief for the
course.
things that I've done, for the things I put my wife through, my family through, the decisions that I've made. But I've also gotten to a point where, listen, this is like I am now using this. God is redeeming it by allowing me to talk about it, to connect with people who are just like me. And everyone, in a sense, I say everyone's an addict, right? Everyone's addicted to something. So
Yep.
everyone is just like me. Maybe your
Yep.
drug of choice wasn't alcohol, right?
Yep.
Again, you can fill in the blank of what it is, right? And for some people, it's people pleasing, it's perfectionism, right?
Yep.
I know someone who everyone says, "Oh, she's a great hospitality person." Yes, but do you know why?
Hmm.
Because she's a control freak. She
Yeah.
can't stand having things out of her control. So just because she's
Yeah.
hospitable, she's actually enslaved, if you will, to perfectionism, to wanting to control
Yes.
everything. Her hospitality is not done out of genuine care and concern for other people. It's done out of, I have to
Yeah.
control everything. And it's actually a very tiring thing. I want her to
Yes.
break free from that,
That's
right?
what I call the Achilles heel, where your strengths become your biggest vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and I think so.
Yeah.
I want boast. The Bible talks about boasting in your weaknesses. I am
Yeah.
an awful person outside of Jesus, right? Look what happens when I try to take control of my life, when I try to turn to
Just
things,
mess it up.
it gets really bad. Bad.
Yeah. I think, John, that you are the Christian alcoholic that so many people need to hear. And that's why you have your experience and your story. You are highly relatable. And as you say that everyone's an addict, and so everyone needs to hear this story, I also say that everyone is the survivor and everyone needs to hear what I have to say is just heal.
Mm,
That's the way, that's the way to get past it. Just do your work to heal. And it
yeah.
is actually as simple as that. Just heal. Hard, hard work, but it's that simple.
It's that hard, but that easy. It's that hard, but that simple, right?
Yeah, it is. It's hard to do, but it's simple. So, yeah, this has been a wonderful conversation. I'm really delighted to have had you on the show today. There's some few other things we could have some interesting conversations about. I'm sure I made some notes about, so maybe we'll explore some other topics
Yeah.
in future episodes. But just want to put your book up here again, Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic, just out in October, inviting everyone who is seeing this or listening to this to go out and get your copy and connect with you. So tell the audience where they can find you.
Yeah, the best place, I've tried to make it as easy as possible. You can go to christianalcoholic.com, and that is the leads you to a landing page on my website where you can get the book, where you can listen to my podcast, which is also called Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic. You can sign up for updates. I have a daily devotional I send out called the Veritas Daily, and just trying to encourage people in what I'm talking about. And like you said, let's heal, right? And my message is hopefully that you and I know the ultimate healer.
Yes.
And I'm honored to have had the opportunity to talk to you and talk to your audience. So yeah, if people want to go to christianalcoholic.com, they can find out more.
Yes, and I will link that in the show notes so everyone will be able to find it. Thank you again for being here today. And I'm sure I'll be seeing you around through some of our mutual friends and
Yes.
another conversation in the future, hopefully.
Thanks, Beth.
Yeah.
I hope you have enjoyed today's episode of Let's Heal with Beth Jones. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel at Beth Jones Healing Mentor. And if you'd like to know more about me and my work to help other survivors to heal, please visit me on the web at empoweredsurvivors.com.